Now back to the morning's big breaking news. The 2020 election season shaken up. President Trump and the First Lady diagnosed with COVID-19 after days on the campaign trail. He tweeted the news overnight saying they're beginning their quarantine and recovery process immediately. There are several angles to the story, and we have you covered this morning, starting with Natalie Brand in Washington.
This morning, we are hearing from a senior White House administration official that the president is in good spirits, but there are huge questions and uncertainty that remain about what happens next and the schedule ahead. The timing of this coming just a little more than 30 days from the election. But from the immediate details we know right now, the White House physician released a memo confirming that the president and First Lady both tested positive for the coronavirus. He said they are doing well at this time. And he also said that he expects the president to continue carrying out his duties without disruption while recovering. But of course, this is a situation that will have to be closely monitored, and the president and First Lady currently in isolation. So while the president can carry out duties today from home, all public events have been wiped from the schedule, and that of course includes a lot of campaign events. The president had been scheduled to travel to Central Florida today for a rally. Obviously, that has been canceled. Right now, the only thing that is on the official schedule is a phone call by the president to talk about COVID-19 support for vulnerable seniors.
Natalie Brand on Capitol Hill for us this morning. Thank you. And a lot of questions about how this will impact the final days of the 2020 election. Here's what we're looking at this morning. The vice presidential debate in Utah is just now 5 days away. So far, there's no indication this would cancel that debate. The next presidential debate is only 13 days out. The CDC recommends a 14-day quarantine, so this could put the debate in Miami at risk of cancellation. And of course, we're now just 32 days from Election Day.
All right, speaking of the election this morning, our Verify team is digging into what this news could mean. They answered two big questions that we've already seen popping up overnight. Here's Matt Gregory.
Our first question is, what happens if COVID-19 forces the president to drop out of the 2020 election? Our sources for this are an elections expert, John Fortier with the Bipartisan Policy Center, and the Republican National Committee's rules. After speaking with Fortier and going over the RNC's rules, we can verify at this point if the president were to drop out of the race, the RNC would decide who the Republican nominee is. Also, don't forget, this isn't the first time a world leader has contracted the coronavirus. Jair Bolsonaro, the Brazilian president, and Boris Johnson, Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, both contracted COVID-19 and eventually recovered. Next question. If President Trump gets too sick, would Mike Pence take over? Our sources for this are the 25th Amendment to the Constitution and the George W. Bush Presidential Archives. Right off the bat, yes, Vice President Mike Pence would take over temporarily if the president got too sick. This goes back to the 25th Amendment to the Constitution, which basically says that if the president feels they can't discharge their duties as president temporarily, they can turn them over to the vice president, and when they feel they are ready to take them back over, they can resume control of the presidency. The last time this happened was during the George W. Bush presidency. Twice while President Bush got a colonoscopy, Vice President Dick Cheney took presidential powers over until President Bush came out of the procedures.
All right, Matt, thank you for that. Reactions from lawmakers are pouring in now. Governor Abbott tweeted early this morning sending prayers to the president and First Lady. He wrote, quote, "May God's healing powers touch them, strengthen them, and raise them up." Right now, we are still waiting to hear from other prominent Texas leaders like Senators John Cornyn and Ted Cruz. So we will, of course, keep you posted on that.
Time is 6:30.